I guess, I mean, I've been thinking about the conversation we had earlier this week some.
Mm-hmm.
And
What was that?
well, just about some things that you wanted to get done, and about your meeting with Marchand, and
Oh,
you asked me to keep it to myself, and I have. Though when
you can't keep it public.
no, I mean, though when somebody asks, I mean, Patty's saying something about you're working too hard or whatnot, and I've said, well, I think he's decided not to do that. I think he's decided he's made some decisions.
I have no problem with Patty at all.
And um, and I think that's important, for all of us. It's just been on my mind. I get, in terms of what we've been doing on the history here, we've still got some work to do. From I know that may not be the most interesting for you in terms of
no, I like it. I don't.
What's going on. We were in the process of doing a rough sketch of your life, and we got up to very early. We got up to getting married, basically, and almost to Chicago. So that's, it's almost up. Well, it's not almost, but it's within sight of when I began to know you. In terms of, the earlier part of your life, I didn't, and then the other discussion that we started a couple of times is the one on women. And we've gone off on various side tracks, and that's one that's interesting.
In terms of the first one,
let me say one other thing. You had just asked some stuff on my mind. And I guess the other thing is, it's just what's going on in my life. It's real interesting to me. I mean, I've lost like 4 or 5 inches around the waist.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on this diet, that you turned me on to, and I like it. It's not a sacrifice. I don't consider myself, and it's just real interesting to me. I feel real good. I feel like I'm, healthier, and it's interesting to me how people react to that.
Mm-hmm.
People in the office, we'll go someplace to eat and they'll say, well, is there something we can eat there, And Teresa and Jody and Peggy all like that kind of eating, they're conscious. And Larry, who needs it more than anybody, he's going to kill himself. Yes. Well, what can I get on here that's full of fat? Kind of a different reaction. So and I guess what hits me, and it's something that we've talked about before in more philosophical terms, and it's something I think about is they call that diet life choices, and I think about it as every time you sit down to eat, you're making some choices. And it's really every time you do anything, you're making some choices. And it's how do you live your life? And so it's, on the bigger themes of what's going on in my life, that's one thing is that, how I choose to talk to my kids every day is what kind of a father I am. Not what kind of a father I think I am, but whether I yell at them or whether I speak with them, reasonably and whatnot. And, so that's kind of where my, the kind of things I've been thinking in my head.
I've often said that freedom is not what the world thinks it is. It's a big word in the world today. Liberation, liberation front, freedom. What the world talks about when it talks about freedom is independence and my rights. And freedom is always in the face of limits. Now, I've said that a lot. And the first limit you have to deal with, and I've said intellectually this, is your own death. It's the first limit you've got to deal with. You got to recognize, I have to recognize, I don't think I'm going to have much of an effect on Mao's China.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have enough time for that. Or tools or language. Now with a progressing heart disease that it's not quite as intellectual anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's damn real. But by the same token, I have always intellectually said that freedom is not idealism. Freedom is reality, realism. What's really happening? And so, with my Marchand situation, I have to take seriously what I've been saying, and it's been interesting for me. I have always had, not always, 30 years, very conscious calling, if you will, that I didn't plant there. It just has been there, just been there. Individually, this calling has always had a background there, and that is church and the world. What does it mean to be a unique people, 11 in the lump, but I'm talking collectively now, not individually. And thanks to war and travels and stuff in Chicago, I have seen almost exclusively absolutely nothing unique in the church. Nothing but sheer conformity. Are you with me?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that's sort of been my calling. I'm fully aware that I'm learning some new things now, but fully aware that that calling has to start with an individual. That a collective that does not respect difference in individuals is not the church. Now that's different than Maoism and Marxism and any other ism. It's even different than Christianity, the opium of the people. The name of the game was to get baptized and live a moral life, and you're one of us. That's not respect of individual thinking, reflection, and ideas, opinions, and so forth. You follow me?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Now, in no way has the idea of this strange, unique body in the midst of a world dedicated to a reward system. The world's dedicated to you be good to me and I'll be good to you. That is the system. Until somebody convinces me that it's not, that is the system. And that system spells doom.
That's like the childish understanding of the golden rule.
Mm-hmm.
Not
Sure.
do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yeah.
But do unto others what they just did to you.
Yeah, it's right on. Yeah, and I don't. My calling is to put a chink in that armor for the sake of my grandkids. I don't know, and here's where some things have been on my mind. How do you do that? What we're up against is not a we, they. It's something that I tend to call, which we haven't discussed, a sacred. It's as powerful as Emperor Hirohito's sun god or whatever. The gods of nature. I won't go into that, you know those things. That are unquestioned, totally unquestioned. And you hear both the Oklahoma bomb people on either side using the word New World Order. I've used it for many years. As a matter of fact, it's in the title of my Emmanuel seminar.
Mm-hmm.
George Bush uses it, and the Michigan militia uses it. And that's because we are in a new global world order. My work has led me to understand that, see, when Annie gets afloat in the popcorn parade with black and brown and white, yellow, standing on it, or when Greg says the young people are colorblind, I have serious questions. I lived in a society that burnt crosses, that called me every night at 2, that left my wife crying 4 out of 5 nights for several years. It led me to a heresy trial, and the major church body is the only layman probably ever to have one. On and on and on and on. To an FBI, the FBI is still calling me a security risk and won't give me my Freedom of Information documents. That came by my being totally non-power, non-violent, respecting. I've never called anybody a racist that I am aware of, ever. And I'm in the midst of everything. I always made mistakes, what I thought was good, right, and proper, and nonviolent, and respectful. And the charge against me has always been led by the church. Emmanuel had its largest congregational meeting in history to that time, when it was announced that I would stand in front of the congregation and answer questions about why am I destroying the town. And on and on and on and on. Of course, the heresy trial and a few other things.
And did you do that?
Yeah. And after I listened to unbelievable statements, not questions, a Vietnam veteran fought for this country and democracy, and here I am tearing it all apart. So my only comments, I could only just smile. I could not do anything else. I mean, how can you answer these things? Or when in our living room, I was one of the chief instigators for forming CCA, which is now government subsidy practice. And the congregational meeting, I was put down because if you help these people, namely these women who needed a halfway house, then you got to help everybody. I'm quoting big stuff, right? Or when the house that you're keenly aware of, out at the Moya's house, when it became practical for the subcommittee of the church, which I had put on their conscience and they took over on, to the president of the congregation was also the president of the bank, who needed a, not an Emmanuel, but a separate tax entity, and made a deal with VBA. And when he was asked at a congregational meeting, well, if we give this money, and it's not the church, how do we get a tax write-off? And he lied through his teeth. Rather than identify with the hated VBA. And I could go a million stories on that. Or mention my name. What I'm trying to say in all these, which there's a lot more of these, in which the price I've never regretted. I've never, other than seeing my wife get tortured half the time, I've never, even for my own children's sake, I've never regretted, because if you can take it, you're learning. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I never had any of my kids on the work site or pushed them. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But they knew where I was. And they bore consequences for it, and I don't regret it. Mm-hmm. Now, if it goes too far, you regret it. You know what I mean?
And that's not in your control.
Well, it is in my control. If it goes too far, I can stop doing my principle, if you will. You know.
No, I'm just saying that by the time it goes too far,
oh, I got you.
It's not in your control. I mean, it's what you mean by it going too far is the consequences that come down on your kids, which are what other people are doing.
Right.
Have gone too far. And
right. Okay, I'm with you.
You know, I'm just saying that it's that's true. I'm sure for lots of people. I mean, I think about the little girls that died in the church that was bombed in Birmingham. Mm-hmm. You know, it went too far, mm-hmm. But it was too late. It's always too late.
That's a good example.
You know,
that's a good example. I'm saying all these things because a lot of it, Reverend Jones, does have to do with race. Directly or indirectly. There's no question a lot of it had to do with race. And one didn't have to be in a conservative, guilt-ridden because of Gary town like Valpo to experience it. I mean, my heresy trial had to do with a so-called moderate administration. An executive director who became the president of LSTC as a moderate. The bishop of the church was a moderate who was overthrown later by arch-conservative. these are the two boys, and out of fear from the Birch Society, out of fear from all that represented, didn't want to rock the boat. They were moderates. They were liberals.
Sure.
They're the ones that came down on me. And that wasn't Valpo. And where were the seminarians who are good at walking out when their theology is disturbed? 90% of them walked out, and the profs. A few years later, when the bishop was an arch conservative, you with me? Where were they when this layperson was having a year-long heresy trial in their midst in St. Louis? Where were the profs? Where was the pastors? Where was my pastor from Chicago was leading the charge against me, breaking his ordination vows.
His ordination vows about what? Secrecy? Or
about how do you deal with a parishioner? He never came to me personally. He violated, this is heavy ordination stuff here. But he was the chief witness against me, and he never ever discussed anything with me. My threat to him, here comes another example. My threat to him was living in the near north side. He commuted to the near north side. My threat to him was honestly and openly saying that we're in the midst of the largest young adult gathering in the world, the near north. And the church doors are locked 6 days a week. Could we not open them for, this is very churchy here, but could we not open them for 1 hour or half hour, say 6 o'clock to 6:30 in the evenings, so that if some of them wanted, because I happen to know that they have they didn't just church, they're separated from Chicken Switch, Iowa, and all that means, you know what I mean? Could we not have a little Vespers where we'd gather if those that want to pop in? That was a threat to him. A gathering which still exists, incidentally, which I originated called St. Matthew's Fellowship. It was for those little more churchy. Could we not meet on Saturday nights at the church and discuss the gospel and epistle lesson for the next day? From where we come.
Yeah, we used to go to that.
From where we come from. I started that.
Yeah, that was meet some people's houses.
Yeah, it met at first at the church.
Yeah.
Then it met, still exists. And
well, I remember that.
These things and others were the reason that this pastor was threatened and led a charge against me as a heretic. I'm saying these things because standing up, and with very few exceptions, I don't think I was rude. I don't think I was disrespectful for the evening vespers. I got a pastor who was willing to come in and do it, and I filled in when he couldn't. I could go, so many stories on other things, POPV, the Peace Corps thing. But anyhow, what I'm trying to get at here is my behavior. Well, one that's close to home. When you said that the administration, through a person said to you that don't let war be in the forefront of the hilltop.
When the administration, it was
a person that's
yeah.
That's the same kind of thing. Now, I would understand that much better had I blown the whistle on Barbara Cotton, what we did at university. Had I ever been rude or disrespectful or made noise or led a demonstration or anything, I never did any of those things.
Well, it's like this the surveyor that
Mhm.
we hired
Mm-hmm.
to do the survey, and I said Reiner Foundation. He says, "Oh, I've been critical of that guy in the past." Gee, I'm sorry. You know, it was and it was
And
kind
he
of
doesn't
like
even know me.
he doesn't know you from Adam.
Yeah.
He knows what other people have said about you,
Mm-hmm.
and the only other people who could have said it are your friends.
Yeah.
To start with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to start with, it had to be your friends who said, "Yeah, this is what you
Now,
do."
all of these things in 100 more stories. The reason I'm saying them is very little of my behavior can be criticized. The process, okay? What I had done was call into question an ideology. Usually the ideology of racism, indirectly or directly. You with me?
Mm-hmm.
So, in a sense, it was racial, in that sense. Now, the reason for all of the strange, weird behavior by the mainstream, putting somebody down that they don't know and can't argue with his behavior, only in words that wouldn't stand up to dialogue. I mean, would stand up to dialogue. How can anybody argue if a neighbor of yours in Chicago said, "Please get me out of here before my kids are killed, jailed, or drugged. Can you help me move somewhere where that won't happen?" And I answer, "I don't have any money, but I'll sure try, and I can only do it where I live. I can't do it where somebody else lives." Now, who's going to argue against that? That everything I have done, here's a good point to me, has been to take seriously, in a sense, what I've heard in sermons all my life.
Mm-hmm.
I've just tried to practice, put into action what I've heard all my life in sermons, all these wonderful pious sermons I've tried to live. And I'm throwing these things not out of regret, not out of self something or other. I'm just simply saying that what happens when you're up against a sacred, an ideology. An ideology is like a sacred that's an opium. It's not questioned.
Yeah, and we've talked about that some.
Now, leaping forward, and Annie's in a popcorn parade with a float, and half the people are not nice. And Walt gets a couple of awards, Exchange Club, few things. More and more people are saying some nice things that don't know me at all. It just might be that isn't the ideology that we're up against anymore. I'm putting that nicely because I know it's not the ideology we're up against. And what I'm getting at is that phenomenon of what it means to question what the world calls good. Here's the job of the church and Christians to me, is to call into question the new world order. Now, the bombers in Oklahoma City call it into question. They have a half-truth. Big Brother is leaping forward thanks to the bombers, incidentally.
Sure.
And our lives are going to be much more controlled. That's been on a steady course for a long, long time. The problem with the bombers, they don't understand the New World Order. Why are we now in a global system? Why is there New World Order? Where did it come from? They say the Jews did it. And or the United Nations. The two together.
Run by the Jews.
Mm-hmm. Now that won't hold up to reasonable thought. But that still leaves the question. This thing is so powerful that it brought down the Berlin Wall without a struggle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This New World Order is so powerful that Gingrich is not disowning his daughter because she's gay. It's real powerful. He would have disowned her 50 years ago, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things. This thing is powerful and seducing. Once again, the reward system. You be good to the New World Order, and they'll be good to you. And Michigan militia, you be bad to it, it's going to be bad as hell to you. And most of us are going to be good to it. I can't get over the donations that are coming in from Chicago, every city in the United States. For what? Oklahoma City's they're not asking for money and blood and everything else. Everybody's giving blood and money, in the whole world, to the victims of Oklahoma City. 100 victims who probably have huge insurance policies from I mean, it's a nice gesture, don't get me wrong. And I got to do something. Why do you got to do something? For somebody that doesn't need it.
And for somebody you don't know.
And you don't know.
Well, it's us.
Yeah.
It's us now.
Now you're hitting it.
It's us. It's not them anymore.
That's right. And that's why even though we hated Jack Kennedy, we were caught by surprise. We died when Kennedy died. This good-looking man, his father, his husband with a good-looking wife, president of the United States, he was me. Yeah. And he's gone. And I died. Now we're into the we thing. Couldn't handle it.
In some ways, the New World Order has not gone far enough because it's not we that it's still us and them.
Oh, well, let me comment on that. That's a whole big area. The New World Order gives us goodies, okay? Cellular phones, VCR, God knows what. Okay, gives us goodies. It's comfortable. It also fractures the hell out of our lives, physically, psychologically, from nuclear bombs to God knows what. And we're anxious, we're threatened, terrorism, all that goes with it. And the us and them thing comes from, I think I said last time, I'm not sure, up until a couple of 100 years ago, or a little more maybe, everybody in the world came from a God. Nobody questioned their God. and all had gods. That's today. We all come from man. That's gone. God's dead. You follow me, Lou?
Mm-hmm.
And the McDonaldism has won. What man can do, and all our spiritualization is all man-made. And now we're into battles. When you say we, them, the big battle in mainstream churches is us and them. Who interprets the Bible right? It splits families in the heavy homes over the right interpretation of the Bible. And in the rest of the world, it's us and them. Republicans versus Democrats, Serbs versus Croats, God knows what everywhere. Rwanda, Huttites and Hittites and Shiites. It's us and them. It's good versus evil. Politics is not the art of the possible. Politics is good versus evil. The terrorists are many different kinds. We haven't seen them all yet. The terrorists are politically some of those. The Michigan militia type folks fighting for their homeland or whatever in the terms of George Washington and the Revolution. The terrorism that's not called terrorism so much as if I can't have it, you ain't gonna have it terrorism. That's everywhere. The streets, cities, people getting blown away. So you're right. It's that's the world's answer to it. That's man's answer to it. And that ranges from the right religion. So with jihad, you kill the people that mess with your faith. To Michigan militia.
It's really interesting in some ways that, you know, our world is so much closer now. I mean, it's within our reach, you know.
It's a global society.
In one way. And, you know, when you think of a village, you know, when you've got a village, you've got, certainly there are strangers who come into your midst. But I don't know that you have the devil there living with you, you know, in your midst. And here you're right. I mean, we've got, you know, you think about it's the Serbs and the Croats, and it's the Americans and the Saddam Hussein, who is the devil incarnate, and vice versa from his point of view. Salman Rushdie, you know, is condemned to death, and it's the evil is somebody else next door to you now in the global world. It's
well, on that point,
I guess you know, I mean, that's not totally new for our society, but
it's different. We never had so many means for relationships: travel, phone, email, counselors coming out of our ears, and therapists and everything else to improve our relationships. And I would argue we've never had so few in-depth relationships in history as we do today. And that causes anxiety and upsetness. So, but anyhow, this part was, what is the New World Order? How did it come by? Who's the enemy? Where did it come from? It's not capitalism per se anymore. What killed not only the wall but capitalism Adam Smith doesn't fit anymore. And used to be saving your money was where it's at. It's stupid today. And used to be that no one questioned, church or not church, your calling in life, your meaning in life had to do with your work. Work today only as a means to get money. That's different. To blow it on the weekends or quit your work early in life. Where'd that come from? And with all that we've said this morning, what I'm trying to figure out is I have a pretty good idea where it all came from. That's been my work. Going against the new good, the new world order, will put you in jail one way. It's a little different. I mean, I have to talk about means somewhere, but it's clear if you're going to fight the government, you're going to get shot. I'm not talking about, even though the state has to be negated in this sense. I'll come back to that. That's not the whole ball of wax. We're fighting a new world order. We're fighting, as I've said before, I just suddenly thought, I'm fighting myself. I want those nuclear medicine, I'm fighting what it gives me. I like what the New World Order delivers. And so the starting place, first of all, is to see where I'm at in this thing. And what I'm getting at is what we're up against comes after that. And just dealing with yourself finds out how enormous the problem is. I don't know if I'm making sense. How do I get the Annies to understand that you're not a revolutionary Annie? You're not radical Annie. I'm just using her, understand? That racism as an ideology is gone. The residue's heavy from the past, but that's not what we're up against today. In another year or two, you'll be put in the head of the parade. In a couple of years after that, I think you'll be ready to run for Congress if you've led that parade. Am I making any sense? Well, the battle today is who is the real person that's really helping the poor. And the Republicans are making some good arguments because the welfare state does promote teenage pregnancies. I happen to have known a lot of them. The only way they can get out of their mother's clutches is to have a baby. Or the only way a gang member can get going is for his girlfriend to have that check.
Gonna call Friday. A friend of ours, Kathy Kuss, over here, Healthy Families. She's taking referrals, tries to help young women who are. I don't exactly remember what her Project Neighbors connection was, but it was somebody. It was not negative from her point of view because she's been in Project Neighbors support groups. She knows how they work and whatnot. There was some kind of connection that this woman was brought here by Project Neighbors from Chicago or something. She's 18. She has a
That's part of what we were talking about before.
Right. Right. Well, and hear it out. She's got a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 10-day-old. And she's depressed. Well, I guess she's depressed. And it's the kind of person that Kathy would, help, but she's, up to here. Lord knows what the story is with this young woman. But,
Sure.
But, I know what you mean. It's like, on the one hand, you have to say, yeah, I know why she does that. And I know mainly because I've heard you talk about it, because you have some contact in those neighborhoods in Chicago, and because I've heard Patty talk about it, because she deals with it on a fairly, she has some experience of that as well, in terms of, she's been in community meetings on, why do teens in Community Green get pregnant and whatnot. And it's, you're absolutely right. It's the welfare system.
And if instead of elections mean mudslinging and good versus evil, and real democracy would mean, and real politics would mean, that both would acknowledge, yes, we have a downside, and I know you're coming at it more from this approach, we're coming at it more from this approach. We both acknowledge their own downsides,
Yeah.
Negotiate.
You can't deny that. On the other hand, the Republican response is, if you're on welfare and you're not married and you're a teenager and you have another kid, we're not going to cover the kid.
Yeah.
And that's cruel. That's mean-spirited at the base. Well,
but just to be open, see, and I can't count on that because of the we-they syndrome and so forth. That openness cannot come from that level. It just can't come from that level. It can't come from mass media.
Yeah.
It's got to come from the bottom. And
there's so little understanding. But I think Kathy Kuss has a grasp on this, probably, because she deals with this enough. It's not the first time she's seen this.
Yeah.
Even in this town.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know. I wrote down a couple of things here while we were talking. And one of them is, just to remind you, from my point of view, of one of the things that I'm interested in exploring with you is why race for you? Why did, and I know this is a little off of this, but not totally. And it doesn't have to be right now, but it's someone who was raised in a Christian household in Tampa, Florida, obviously exposed to racist ideology as a young man.
Totally.
And I don't even know how your parents treated that, but you certainly understood.
Separate but equal.
Yeah. Okay.
At best.
Yeah. And how do you go from that to, and maybe part of the explanation is the faith and whatnot. I understand that, but how do you go from that to where you can respond to Barbara Cotton when she says, "Why not me?" And to where it.
I think on that last one, there's what's interesting here. It's a very interesting point. I'm not sure where it would go, but I have said several times that that most people, I think my gift is because of a lot of environmental, as much as James, is ideas and adventure and no details. I mean, I'm just amazed what's happening with Hilltop, which I could never do.
Well,
what I'm getting at is a little tricky here. I've said that if anybody knew Mary Breland, or really knew Rosalind Blake, or really knew Barbara Cotton, there isn't much different that they would do than what I've done. You with me a little? What I'm trying to get at? The question is then, if that were sort of true, and I think it is, each one of us would answer that question differently, but each one of us would be concerned about it. Barbara's question. You with me? I mean, not everybody would say, well, you can move to my town. Somebody else might say, I'll help you move to Park Forest South, which is integrated. I couldn't do that. That's not me, all right? I have to be where there's relationships. But what I'm trying to say is that if we knew her, like I did, for several years, you couldn't walk away from the question. The question is, for me then, how do you get to know people who are different than you? And that's not different than your question, but it's a different way to put it. You follow me? In other words, the way you put it, I'm just thinking top of my head here, but the way you put it was sort of an abstract thing. Where does race fit in? For me, it's where does Barbara Cotton fit in, Or better still, where does the question to Walt and his answer fit in, which required human relationships. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Sure, absolutely.
And so the question for me, when Loie and I stood she remembers this, in the middle of the football field. And I'm asking her to marry me. I said, before you answer, I want you to know that I don't know how come the thing called church is always on my mind. The theology must have been horrible, okay? But it was there. Probably because of the war, depression. But please think over carefully. I'm not guaranteeing that I'll end up being a football coach or whatever. I tried not to make something big of it because I had no idea. But if I might end up in Africa, and I got to do that. So think about it, So please understand that this is not something that I think will go away. I guess what I was trying to say is that there's a public me that's not unimportant. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted her to know that. I wanted her to know, as I think back, that having the good life at the expense of public obligations is not necessarily where it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And she should know that. She remembers that. Now, I don't know what caused me to do that. I think it was the war, okay? But what I'm really saying is that in my case, I doubt if I would have been on that football field talking to Lloyd that way had it not been for depression and war. And this rural is not unimportant, a rural churchy background, moralistic background. I say rural, it's a subject for another time, but the Dionysians and the Zeusians and the Black Madonians and all this, they all came from rural. They didn't change very quickly to Constantine and etc. They brought baggage along. The Mayans bring baggage along, so that when you go to the Catholic Church in Antigua, you don't really know what you're worshiping. It's a trip, man.
I bet. They bring in some of the local culture there, and all of a sudden it's not Latin masses anymore.
That's right. And the incense of the Catholics, they didn't realize what they were getting into with incense,
But let me go, and I appreciate this because, part of it is for somebody like the surveyor, Bingle, who says, I've been critical of that Walt Reiner in the past. And he's been critical of you because of the things that you have done with respect to race in our society.
Mm-hmm.
And it's how do you make that explicable to him? Not that you have any interest in doing that necessarily, but how does one talk about that in a way that makes sense? And I think what you said is it makes sense to me is that the question's wrong. It's not what got you to race, but it's what got you into relationships with people that caused you to have to deal with the problems of race in the society.
Before I lose it, that's the very thing. My best friend, I didn't know a Jew from Adam in Tampa. Okay, my best friend, 11 Invasions, this is pretty heavy stuff. He's a Jew, and he's my best friend not only because he was a comrade in arms, but he's the only one that could talk some sense, even theological sense. I mean, I'm talking about a very thin line here, level. But I went through some stages, and then lo and behold, I am put in Springfield College. But prior to Springfield, I told you this, I had to work for 6 months before college. And I was a laborer, only white, with other laborers, and they were all not young, and they all goofed off. And I said, how come you all goof off so much? And he said, Sonny, we're going to be here till we're 70. You're going to be gone in a couple months. And then I put in a roommate, this Tampa, Florida boy. My roommate is Otis Finley, a black, who's now a top psychiatrist in New York State.
Roommate is who?
Otis Finley. But also a churchman, huh?
F-I-N-D?
L-E-Y.
And where was this?
Springfield College.
Okay.
I mean, they put you with a roommate. You didn't ask. I didn't know anybody anyhow. So here I got a black roommate, you know. uh, there was no more separate but equal shit.
How'd you feel about that?
I had, things had already happened to me in the war. I had no problem. I raised questions aboard ship about the blacks, only black, they were stewards, you know, for officers. That's the only job they could have. And, I gotten into arguments on it. And, see, I think this, I don't know how to say this, George, but I'm not sure it was true with my gang of five that I grew up with. We would hike into the woods and spend a night and camp, or we didn't have any gear like we do now, but and we would walk through we'd walk through in the boondocks in the woods, maybe 4 houses in a row of blacks, huge families, okay? We'd walk through there and absolute utter poverty. And I also knew they didn't go to school. First of all, there were no school buses in those days. And why did that bother me? I don't know. Why did it bother me as a kid, as an 11-year-old, as a Dylan? You follow me?
Mm-hmm.
Why did it bother me? I can't say it was my mother and father. Except my mother was very respectful of Maud, our maid, very respectful of the black garbage man, although she would never live with him, but very respectful. That's about as much as I could get. Why was I so bothered? And that never left. That never left. That was always sort of a root. That's as far back as I can go on rights. I wasn't bright or anything. I don't know. But I do know that the relationship thing, you could argue now to doomsday on separate but equal, anything you wanted didn't mean shit. I knew that. And see, one of the big things I'm having in my head now with the church, in Luke, with the building on rock and sand, that's been a very important thing more and more to me, because it permeates the whole Bible. It's not a magic Jesus story. It's whoever hears my word and doesn't do it is like one building on sand. Whoever hears my word and does it. Paulo Freire, the two have to go together. You can't have one without that. You can't have action without reflection, the word, and vice versa. And here I've been saying all along, I have done nothing but what I've heard in sermons. I get clobbered for it. There's something rotten in Denmark, a la Kierkegaard. Your father?
Mm-hmm.
Do pastors know that if their congregation did what they said in the sermon, the congregation would be blasted by the society around them? They'd lose members like crazy. Does he know that? Or is he confident that they won't do it? Stay with me on one more point on the same thing. Marx says you are what you do. And if you have a right project, a right structure, a right institution, you'll make a new man. That's about as false as the Russian Empire was. Then, is the other true? is the other. You start with the individual. That's what Christianity always says.
But back up a second.
Yeah.
Marx said what? You are what you do?
You are what you do.
Okay.
And translated, Marx was into structuralism. Have the right institution, the right structure, and you'll make new people. Okay? That has failed miserably, even though we're doing it in this country night and day. They really did win. The losers always win, and the winners always lose. In all wars, take a look. We're Marxian as can be. Everything today is answered by a project. Christmas in April is a project to make new people. If you went to Greg's church last Sunday, you would have heard it. Two men worked, Alvin Shields and Bill Thompson. How this project kicked them off to a new life. Oh God, it was awful. That's Marxism. That's our society. That's therapy. But anyhow, the opposite is Christendom with a problem. Christians said, no. You start with the individual, and from the individual will come the right institutions. Okay? And structures and programs and everything else. That's right. It's absolutely right in my thinking. Problem. It's called hypocrisy. You say one thing and do another. Or you say one thing and don't do it. No, either way. That's hypocrisy. The church that Marx looked at was a hypocritical church. Now, he didn't know that. He just said, what I see is opium of the people. Has no respect for the individual whatsoever.
You know, I see some truth in both of those things. I mean, you know, and I think that your story, you know, he hears my word and doesn't do it, builds his house on sand, is both sides of the story, because, you know, you are what you do. I think that's really true. In some respects.
Don't go too fast on that one.
But wait. But
thank God I'm not. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, that may not be all that you are.
Okay, that's a little better.
You know, okay.
It's not the last word.
That's right, and it may.
But it was for Marx. If you're bourgeois, you're dead.
Okay, and it may be that you start with the individual, but if the individual doesn't do,
he's bullshit.
He's bullshit.
That's
right.
what the sand is.
And I understand that. But I'm just saying that you can't. I mean, Marx, you know, that you are what you do is, you know, that's what I think takes so many young people out of the church. Took me out of it, is because what they did was hypocritical. I mean, it had no relationship to what they said they were going to do, or should do, or ought to do. And so, in my life, a lot of, you know, I've gotten a lot. I mean, I think it's important to do things.
I'm Paulo Freire, and Jesus Christ said the same thing.
That's right, and that's not without, you know.
But that has to be. Here's another angle. That has to be in tension with the word.
Okay.
The word means thought, reflection. No, wait a minute. I'm making one other additional point. Has to be in tension. We have both today, but there's a wall between the two. Responsibility, action, and thinking are separated. This group does the thinking, this group does the action, or whatever. We separate responsibility and action. We don't let the neighborhood parents and teachers decide in our school are we going to have free condoms or not. There's a good side and a bad side to it. Instead, the state decides.
Mm-hmm.
We have to live with it and take no responsibility, really. I don't know if that's a good example. It's one I always use. But that's a crucial one. This sand. I used to not think anything of it, but more and more I think that parable is enormous, and it permeates the whole written word, which is not the word.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, and I've told you this before. It was my thoughts as a young man when I was grappling with the women's movement. And I had always been respectful of women. I mean, I had never been one to participate in the locker room kind of conversations about who's doing who and all that stuff. And the women's movement made sense to me. But it didn't mean that in my, when I was struggling with, well, sometimes I look out there and I see somebody who's good looking and I think, boy,
mm-hmm.
Objectify her. And, a friend of mine who's a gay woman who is from Germany, as a matter of fact, and was very theoretical. She said, don't worry about what goes on in your head. She says, worry about,
action.
Worry about how you treat people. She said, you treat people fine. You treat women not as objects, and
oh, I agree with that.
You can't censor your own thoughts. She said, there's nothing wrong with having those thoughts. You can have any thought you want. Have the sense not to act on it, on some of those thoughts. And and her other point was that if you change the way you act, you will change the way you think, in some respects. And it was in that context that I'm saying I think the action is, and that's in tension with thought, because you can think, you can know what the right.
See, what you're saying is a pretty heavy Protestant kind of shit. That to be is to have the right motives, the right intentions, and so forth. And of course, you end up doing nothing. And Marx says you are what you do. Now, if I were to choose between the two, I'd take the doing any day. The streets of hell are paved with good intentions,
mm-hmm.
Whatever that means. But much more important is the action than the intention. I don't disagree with you, but
I guess from where from having been raised in a Southern Baptist church where there's a fairly heavy guilt and kind of
moral
intention kind of thing, and that was a lesson to me. That's kind of what drew me to Marxism and to those ideas, is that
the action
it is because it was in tension with where I came from.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the action had become important, whereas it wasn't important. What everybody told me is that it was important, but what everybody showed me in my church is that action wasn't important.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you said it, it was fine, but you didn't have to do it. From blacks come and knock on the doors of the church, and the church says no.
And then, if one were to understand that, and that the two go together, that Jesus was serious when he talked about rock and sand. He that hears my word and does it is like one building on a rock. Then the next question is, what is the doing we ought to be doing? Now here, we don't have much more time right now, but the world is into doing. The world is into action today. Action for action's sake. Then we have to be careful with our kids. Just throwing out a project can be dangerous, I think. what's missing, and Paulo Freire pushes this, is what's missing is reflection and thinking about what we're doing, what we're presently doing, etc. So in the big picture, you have action for action's sake. Got to be slow and careful. To be is to, that's AA becomes the end of the line. Instead of being a useful tool, it's your new religion, kind of thing, and everything. Or my therapist, or God knows what, that has to be put into a proper perspective. The starting place is not there at all. I like to get on one of these days to then, what is this thing that we ought to be questioning? What is the unique role of a people who are not in the reward system? They don't have to be in the church. On the other hand, I would argue somewhere down the pike that without that transcendent that transcends the world, the globe, the New World Order, without a foot on the outside looking in, it's pretty hard to really look at what's happening. Now, maybe some other faith can give that. I don't know of any other transcendent faith that walks with man in his or her stupid moves. But at any rate, in a global New World Order, we have to have a point from which we can stand and look at the whole thing. I blew off probably Fred Needham. That's why I'm going to go hear him this morning. I don't know if I blew him off or not, but he didn't know what I'm talking about. I haven't talked much of this, but I said, you get your degree and you put hard 12, 15 years, get your PhD, you get your tenure, you get everything based on the new hermeneutics is based on the historical critical method, which is a computer. And data, research, that's it. And if you're not into that, you're not going to get it. Okay? You sacrifice your family, your time, your fun, your games in order to get your tenure and now your PhD and this and this. Are you strong enough to criticize that world that's given you everything that you've got? Do you follow what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely. I'm not even sure after spending 7 years towing the line to get tenure that many people are even the same people they used to be. I mean,
it's New Mutants. I agree with you. It can't even be a thought.
It's
a study was done in Washington many years ago about freedom and with profs. And I'm making it my language, but the profs that acted with the most freedom were non-tenured profs.
Absolutely. And it's the young people who come in with energy and beliefs and whatnot, and if they make it through the system, they get, one dimension. They get pushed to the middle.
Mm-hmm.
They learn how to conform. They're no longer the exciting young professors.
By law, they can do almost anything they want except screw a girl in class or something, and they won't make a move. They won't say anything.
I'm always amazed. I mean, I've got this tenure case now, and it's the full faculty. I mean, it's the tenured faculty who are the most gutless. Always. Every time. I mean, I look at Chuck Gallmeyer here. Now, I don't hold him up as a saint. I don't know what he did and didn't do, but he was a good teacher. He turned students on. And I call my friend Wells Ketty, who's been fired from as many places as he's worked practically, minus one, and is also a good teacher. He's talking to me about it. Why'd they fire him? And I went in and somebody said, well, is he a good teacher? I said, yeah. So that's why they fired him. He's a threat to the tenured faculty who can't teach.
That's an example I was giving of myself all the way through, in a sense.
Yeah.
I was doing what they told me to do, hard as I could.
And it's very few like you who can make it through that system, get tenure, and still be one. I mean, you think about academia.
It took football to do that.
It's supposed to question.
It took a poor university in football.
Yeah. No, there's all kinds. I mean, people slip through the system.
Mm-hmm.
There are good faculty members who can teach who don't get the rough edges taken off of them in the tenure process. There are some dynamic people in there, and every university has them. But lots of times they're the exception, and they ought to be the rule.
Well, I think I'd like to see us keep moving on this next time.
Yeah, no,
it's good for me because I need to talk these things just for my own sake. It's inside of me, and there's no other place to do it.
Well, it's good for me too. I think for each of us, for myself, I see the logic in my development from where I came from to where I am now. And there's some continuity, and I think every life has that. Everybody's life does. But it's hard for others to understand, perhaps. And so it's...
We're a very absurd society, absurd. And what I hear you, and I see a lot in you, is a keynote. Wherever possible, that goes for our grandkids and kids. We got to fight for reason. The spiritualization, everything that's going on today is so absurd it isn't even funny. The spiritualization really bothers me, which is total opposite of reason today. We're going back to primitive rituals of religions, literally, and in the church we're going back to ancient incense and rites and God knows what. And I think we have to go back to our spiritual roots, but not nostalgia.
What time's Negro?
Oh, he's not on until 10:30, but I gotta organize a little bit. Nostalgia is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about spiritual roots. See, I argue that the reformers didn't do that. The question that thank God for Luther, okay, stood tall to Charles V and everything under the sun against the sacredness. But here, in the name of the church, indulgences are being sold. You couldn't get farther removed from the Christian message and faith in the first 4 centuries than selling and buying your way into purgatory and into heaven. Now, the question that wasn't dealt with, how in the hell did we get here? Where did that start? It didn't come overnight. We go from, I hate indulgences to selling indulgences. How do we get from being known by the whole world, Western world, as a crazy little atheistic one God or something people who hated slavery to being promoters of slavery. I mean, how did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
That's real history.
Yeah.
What's the spiritual root of it? How did we become if you're in a communist country, your church was conformist to socialism. If it was in poor Latin America, it was conformist to liberation theology. In America, the church and state and police were locked solid against the unions. Wherever there's a monarchy that is crossing the crown, whatever society we were in, now it's one world, we were conformists.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're conforming to standard of living, which is global. Everybody thinks positive of increased standard of living.
It's funny, you talk about the conformity of communism. I went down to Cuba, enthralled with the communist system and see what it was like. And the leaders of the young communists there that we worked with on this brigade building houses down there were exactly like the young Republicans in the States.
Mm-hmm.
They were the conformists. We were as foreign to them as we were almost like the ones that Castro was putting in jail for being,
troublemakers,
blaspheming the communist system. I mean, we were closer to those people, the anti-communists in Cuba, than we were to the young communists. We were all American radicals who've been involved in the anti-war movement, various political movements and whatnot. And these people we worked with were, the guy I got closest to, it was clear to me that he joined the Communist Party because that's the way he's going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how he was going to get a job and how he was going to progress. And, that was the path. And the only people I knew in the States who did that were all Republicans, going for business and all that. The farthest, it's like.
Even the morality of say, communist Russia and everything it's about as conservative as you could have got.
Yeah.
Drinking and smoking, screwing around. No way. Here come the yippies.
That's right. There you go.
Don't come near us. All right. See you around.
Okay.
Going to your form?
Not this morning. It's Gus shows ELCA video.